what is the pencil draw? So this is obviously kind of an old-timey term because who uses pencils anymore, except maybe me. Um, but let's take a look at what some of our answers are. A, sketches that the architect produces during the construction administration phase to make clarifications or convey more information. B, when the architect produces an estimate of percent of completion for the owner to use for their monthly payout to the contractor. C, when the contractor produces a spreadsheet sworn statement that includes all the trades on the project and how much they have each billed the GC. And D, the process of adding red lines to official drawing set to record the as-built drawings, as-built aspects of the construction as it differs from the contractor drawings. So I'm just going to run through and get rid of a couple of these. D is definitely not it, though it's an interesting one that the idea of somebody keeping track of the as-builts, typically that's the contractors as they go along are sort of taking notes on the drawings, and then as also typically as sort of an extra to the contract, as an additional service, you might take those as-built sketch pieces of information and develop it into a full set of drawings. Different situations would require that. Not every situation would require it, but the idea of there being a difference between what the contract drawings look like and what the final building looks like is sort of something that you should understand, and that there may be a need to have that be documented through the as-built. But that's not what the pencil draw is about. Similarly, A is also sketches. The pencil draw is actually not about sketches or drawing at all. So I'm going to take A out. So then the question is it B or C? And you can actually figure this out pretty fast when you look at B and you say, when the architect produces an estimate of percent of completion. In general, the architect doesn't do that. The only time an architect would be if there's a conflict or a change order going on, something where there's a discussion happening. But essentially, the schedule, the percent of completion, the means and methods, that's all part of the GC's world. So B is not it because the architect does not actually produce that estimate. So C, which is when the contractor produces a spreadsheet, sworn statement. So this is a big list of all the different trades on the project. So it'll say, plumber, it'll say carpenters, it'll say electricians, et cetera, et cetera. So each of those folks will have their place in a big chart, and that chart will then have what's their total dollar amount. So we know that what each trade totally is. And then there'll be the overhead and profit, so overhead and plus profit, and other kinds of things that are part of the GC's element. So all that gets added up, and then that gets added up, and you have a total amount for the project. So there's the actual bid number that the contractor gave to the owner, and it's all of those things all listed. But then it's also what their percentage of completion is, what each of one of those at this moment is. So if we're on month number 1, well then excavation and concrete are probably pretty far along in their percent of complete, but maybe electricians, very little. There might be a little bit of site work, but probably not much until there's something to put your conduit and wires into. So the percent of completion will change as it goes through for each individual trade as you go along. So this document sort of keeps a running tab that tells us, well, what's the total amount? Are there any changes and change orders to the total amount? And then there'll be each line item for each plumber, each carpenter, or each of the different trades. Are there any specialty information about them? Then there's the percent of completion. Then how much do they get paid out for this payout review? How much have they already been paid from in the previous payouts? which let's assume are monthly, although they don't have to be. They could be milestone or something else, but typically monthly. And then you get to the retainer section, and the retainage is the idea that let's say we're going to pay the plumbers $22,000, but we might have, say, a 10% retainage, which means that 10% of that 22 gets put off to the side in a special escrow account. So that's a way of getting those plumbers to come back and finish stuff off at the very end. But we can then, once they are done, once we get to sort of final completion, everybody gets paid out. Actually, often substantial completion, depending on the trade. So this is this great big document. It's got all of these different numbers in it, but it's the way that you sort of keep track of the big numbers, but then also each trade and how much of work they've done up to that point. The reason it's called a pencil draw is because back in the day, you would literally do this in pencil, and then you'd meet at the site, everybody would talk about it, and you'd erase out the numbers that nobody could agree on, and you put new numbers in. So you did it in pencil, not in pen, in order to make it easy to have that be a conversation. Obviously, nobody does it in pencil anymore. It's all done on spreadsheets. And as you go along, they do the spreadsheet. We go through the pencil draw. If I agree with all those numbers, I am willing to sign the form. Otherwise, we talk about what the number should be. Well, the plumbers are they really at 70% complete, but they haven't done any of the stacks yet? Well, that's probably not 70. That's probably more like, I don't know, 40%, right? So we have a conversation about what's the reasonable amount done on the job site. Once we get to a point where we all agree, then they produce the final version of that month's payout. I sign it as the architect, the contractor signs it, and then that goes to the owner, and the owner uses that as a tool to know how much they should pay the GC. They pay the GC then takes that money and then pays all of those individual trades people, so that all of that gets paid, and the retainage goes off to the escrow account in the bank somewhere. So pencil draw, produced by the contractor, reviewed by the architect, signed off by both contractor and architect, and then used once it becomes the final draw, not the pencil draw, used by the owner to pay everybody, to pay the GC, who then pays everybody.